On today's episode of MULTIPULM Voices, we are continuing our Women in Science series with a conversation that goes beyond the lab, beyond the prototype, and into the question that really matters. How do we make innovation land in the real world? Welcome to MULTIPULM Voices. I am your host, Chris Aguilar, and this is where research meets real-world care. MULTIPULM is a Horizon Europe project working on accessible integrated care for people with multiple chronic conditions in low and middle income countries, specifically Brazil, Serbia, and Turkey. Throughout the month of February, in recognition of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, we're launching our Women in Science podcast series, where we spotlight women shaping integrated ethical and implementable science. This series is about visibility, ownership, and leadership, because the future of integrated care is being built by both men and women's voices deserve to be heard. My guest today is Eva Palaiologk, project manager at Future Needs Management Consulting Ltd. In MULTIPULM, Future Needs supports the project's visibility and outreach, stakeholder engagement, and the exploitation pathway so that what we build is not only scientifically strong, but also usable and sustainable beyond the next 4 years. Eva, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
It's a pleasure to have you with us, Eva. To get us started, could you tell our listeners a bit about yourself and your role within MULTIPULM?
My background is in fact mixed. I studied back in the days physics in Greece, and shortly I realized that my passion lies with creative studies and with social sciences and humanities, and that's where I switched to industrial design, which led me to my doctorate in user system interaction, which I did here in the Netherlands, where I am based off. And after that, I worked in the Netherlands as well, in multinationals, in more corporate environments than the one I work right now. Last year, I joined Future Needs, and I perform various roles. The role I have in MULTIPULM is the one of the project manager, with the focus on human-centered design and the research methodologies I learned during my doctorate and my career here in the Netherlands.
Wonderful, Eva. Now, when you manage projects on behalf of Future Needs, wearing the hat of the project manager like in MULTIPULM, how does your core expertise in human-centered design affect this role?
While being a project manager, I still exploit what I have learned from my previous career as a human-centered design researcher and innovation consultant. And this happens through the principles of the human-centered design that I try to apply. As you mentioned, in Future Needs and for MULTIPULM, we perform various tasks and we lead things like the formation of the communities of practice, financial modeling, exploitation, dissemination, communication. I'm not the expert in all of these fields. And to be honest with you, what I try to do is looking at how I can look through the lens of the teammates who have the expertise to make them, to empower them in order to be able to do their best potential. The principles of the human-centered design that I mentioned earlier are empathy, curiosity, embracing ambiguity, humility, iteration, collaboration, optimism, as well as systems thinking. These I try to exploit in the following way. So I, of course, take compliance seriously because EU projects are complex projects with work packages, milestones, reporting KPIs, and whatnot. And you need the rigor, you need to document, you need to coordinate. But the way I try to approach it is to look at the how can we collaboratively be a bit of a leader of ourselves and a bit of a project manager of ourselves for this project to succeed. So, for example, I don't see the deliverables as documents to submit. I see them as interventions. So I would ask the team, before we finalize this, have we tested with real people that this deliverable is meant for? I don't try to check the box and send the deliverable on the day that it has to be sent, but I try to push for, is what we are delivering meaningful, not is it finished? And that comes also with when I work with stakeholders. I naturally move toward the co-creation instead of engaging end users or stakeholders at the pilot phase. I try to involve them earlier, even if the proposal didn't explicitly demand that depth of engagement. And that, I believe, reduces the risk and strengthens the adoption, especially in projects like MULTIPULM that has to do with patients, multimorbidity patients, and they carry more than just one burden. So back to how I manage risk in the team is I try to ask not what could go wrong, but actually what assumptions are we making that might not hold. So we don't move towards something that nobody actually needs, but we validate early on and across the whole life cycle of our project. And that holds also for the consortia in general. Europe projects are big projects, and usually a big part of the job of a project manager is the relationship building, the different cultures that exist within a consortium, the institutional agendas, and the speeds of working. They differ so much that the human-centered design principles help me remind myself to be attentive to motivations, incentives, and the unspoken tensions. So when I remind myself of this, but also my team, I manage the scope and the timelines as well as the budget in an easier way. So, of course, a project manager is supposed to be attentive to things like compliance, but what human-centered design approach brings to the game is ensuring that the impact is there.
It sounds like this human-centered design principle approach really reframes the project management as more than just deadlines and deliverables. It becomes a craft of making sure the project stays aligned with real people, real constraints, and real adoption. Now, you started off your career as a physicist. What is a strength that you've developed as a woman in this field that you suspect has shaped you as a professional in your current career as a human-centered design researcher in the field of social sciences and humanities?
Thanks, Chris. And you touch upon an important milestone in my career, indeed, which was the physics, and feels already like decades ago, like a life I lived once upon a time. I should say that every experience is meaningful. That's what my mom always says. And only now I see how physics shaped my path and who I am today as a professional. Because physics offered me the ability to develop critical thinking. So in physics, I was constantly challenged because assumptions are continuously tested. And as a woman in a male-dominated environment, I was well aware that I need to be exceptionally prepared and clear and solid in what I'm communicating. And two things resonated with me. One, I decided that in everything I do, I need to feel comfortable with complexity and uncertainty. So in physics, you sit with a problem for a long time, and you shouldn't panic when you don't immediately see the solution. You learn to break things down systematically, and only that, you realize how the solution comes to you. So this analytical discipline is something I carry strongly also in the human-centered design approach that I apply in my current job, and especially when dealing with messy social systems. And the second thing is that it strengthened my voice, basically, my career in physics. So often, as the only woman in a room, I had to speak when it matters. I had to learn how to ground my arguments in evidence and separate my ego from the critique, as well as stay aside and steady when challenged. In social sciences and humanities research, this combination, I think, is very powerful, although the social science and humanities is more about qualitative, about interpretive, about relational, and the ability to structure ambiguity, build evidence-based narratives, and hold your ground in interdisciplinary conversations. So all these things together, they become a superpower. However, in the social sciences and humanities field, I also had to unlearn something that I learned during my career in physics. So I had to unlearn that not everything can be reduced to equations. So social systems are not particles. People are not variables that can be isolated. And the transition to empathy played a crucial role, as not just the rigor and the analytical thinking are the ones that shaped me today as I started my career in physics, but also the ability to navigate complexity, facilitate across disciplines, and build structured insight from human experience, things that I learned during my career applying human-centered design methodologies.
Wow, you've touched on a lot of very interesting topics in relation to working in the sciences, whether it's physics or the social sciences. And you're really showing a powerful evolution because you're describing a shift from understanding the world as something that you can model to understanding the world as something you have to co-create with. And that really takes us directly to MULTIPULM because integrated care only works when it's co-owned. It lives or dies on trust, relevance, and whether people actually want to use what's being built. So one of the tasks that you lead in the project is nurturing local stakeholders and communities of practice formation. What are the ingredients of a successful community of practice?
This is indeed something that we are kickstarting as we speak, together with the Kingston University. And this is another thing where my nature of co-creation kicks in. The community of practice starts always with a shared meaningful problem. It's not something where you can place people and tell them, okay, here's a community, use it. The people who are in this community, they need to share a common problem. They need to feel why I am here and that this matters to my daily work. So only if they feel the psychological safety, they can perform in this community and this community can mean something to them. So if the participants can't openly discuss challenges, constraints, or even failures, the community doesn't mean anything to them. So they don't get to real learning. They just politely report and give updates to each other. Another thing that I believe is important is clear value, especially in healthcare. People are very busy. They would stay engaged only if the community offers peer learning, practical tools, influence over implementation, and visible improvements in their context, and constant visible improvement, so that it's clear to them why they're here and why this community is something that can bring value to them tomorrow. Also, a strong thing is the flexible facilitation. This is something that needs to be provided because the communities, as I said, they don't run themselves. They need structure, but also space for organic exchange. And finally, I think what plays a key role in here and in more EU projects is the sustainability. So from the beginning, we think about how ownership can gradually shift to local actors because the community of practice is something that is to be sustained by these local actors. When the project ends, this community is supposed to stay, and that is the whole reason we are building it. So people who share this common problem can actually find value in it by exchanging meaningful learning opportunities and value and own the space together.
Yeah, so the common thread is quite clear: shared urgency, trust, real value, and long-term ownership. And you're also describing something that's easy to underestimate: the human infrastructure that makes the technical work matter. Now, when you're doing that work across different partners with high expectations within the team, pressure moments are inevitable. And that's where leadership becomes very real, very fast. In high pressure moments, what's the difference between a team that performs and a team that collapses based on what you've seen in past projects?
Not an easy question, I should admit. However, I can say that rarely a team that collapses is because of technical brilliance, the absence of it, I should say. And teams that don't perform in high pressure moments, I believe, are teams that lack empathy. So, how people actually show up under stress. A team that performs well and can withstand, let's say, those pressure moments is not a team that just follows rules and deadlines, but it actively considers what everyone else is experiencing. So they take the time to pause and think, how is my teammate handling this? What are the pressures they are under? And what support do they need? This is not sympathy per se. This is about understanding the perspective of the others, the teammates, and understanding why are they thinking or acting in this way so that you can help accordingly. And from my own experience as a woman in physics, but also later in interdisciplinary projects, I've seen how stress can amplify hierarchies and silence the quieter voices. Empathetic teams, on the other hand, they notice these dynamics and they actively make space and can encourage honest reporting. So they speak up in time, because if they don't, they are actually led to those pressure moments where they collapse. And as I said earlier, when I was talking about the communities of practice, a key role in here is also the psychological safety. So a community or a team are certainly in need of this safety space where they can admit the mistakes, they can surface the challenges, and they can discuss them, not just politely report about them or skip the reporting because they fear the consequences. The emotions are supposed to not just surface, but let you be aware of how you're dealing when you're in an environment which doesn't have the conditions you thought would be the successful ones for you to perform. So either you take the opportunity and you reflect on those, or you just let them grow and explode. So when I lead projects, I try to make space for empathy and emotions. So we don't just talk about the content, but we also have space to understand each other's view, each other's competence, and the motivations, which actually build the collaboration and don't allow for these pressure moments to happen.
Yes, I can give you a first-hand account that this approach is very much appreciated. So it's wonderful to hear what you're saying, and it's really important what you're saying because it's suggesting that performance isn't just about pushing harder and harder, but about people feeling safe enough to be honest early on so that problems can get handled before they turn into a crisis, right? And you've built that mindset not only through the project, but through life. There's another dimension of leadership that you bring that changes how you see time, priorities, and what truly matters. Now you are raising two wonderful little girls. And has becoming a mother changed the way that you manage your work? If so, how has this changed?
It certainly did. And of course, it's a journey that when you're on board and you don't expect, you're not necessarily prepared for all this wisdom, let's call it like that, that comes out of it. And there are certain things that I believe that changed. And I don't have these 10 hours or 12 hours a day to spend on my work. And I am not one of those mothers that wake up at 5 a.m. and go to the gym and then create the best conditions for the rest of the family to go to work, school, or whatnot. And it's a hard work on its own. But what it taught me is to be more sharp when prioritizing things. So just because you don't have the same time already gives you limits. I I can say healthy limits to prioritize what's important. When I onboarded on this journey of motherhood, I felt like I missed some tools or methods on or how to handle my daughters. So I started listening to several books, like the one called How to Listen So Kids Would Talk and Talk So Kids Would Listen, which I think is a very powerful book because it actually prepares you for certain situations at work as well. So this made me aware of the things I explained earlier, like labeling the emotions and allowing for the team to discuss those emotions before we start setting behavioral limits. Because this is sometimes a thing that we skip at work and we focus on what needs to be done, but without this in the background, you cannot have a team that is performing well. Another thing I would say is flexibility and adaptability. So every day seems like an unexpected day, I could say. So you think it's going to flow in a certain way, but your life becomes a little bit more complex, I would say, because you suddenly don't manage only yourself, you manage your family. And you need to be extremely flexible and ready to adapt to these changes. And otherwise, you will only feel that you are under pressure and you will feel that you didn't succeed what you wanted.
It sounds like becoming a mother has made you a master of improvisation and flexibility, which comes in handy as each day brings something new. And this book, Learning How to Listen So Your Kids Will Talk and Talk So Your Kids Will Listen, sounds like a book I want to read and that a lot of us could and should read, as it talks a bit about communication being a two-way road, right? And what you listen and what you say. So that's very interesting. And how wonderful that you can tie these worlds together, how being a mother has taught you things that way in your professional life and maybe vice versa. And now we're getting to my favorite part of the podcast series where I get to ask our guests a bit about the future and some advice or some suggestions or what they envision for the future for the girls that might be listening to this show and are interested in the sciences. So what kind of leadership do you want your daughters to see more of in the world? And how do you try to model this?
So, what I really value is the collaborative leadership. And this is what I'm trying to model at work, but also at home. So, I believe that we are all leaders of ourselves, and we need to start from that perspective that no one has the best answers unless you try to bring the problem to the team, to the family, to the community, and hear what are the questions that are coming up from the different people who are part of this team community, etc. Only by hearing those questions, you can understand what this problem is in a better way, and you can sharpen the understanding around also what are the potential solutions. So while applying the collaborative leadership, you try to first bring the problem to the table, so diverge when thinking about what is this problem, what are the questions that are surrounding this problem, and then you try to converge by finding the solutions. However, finding the solutions happens again with the people that have shared the insights about this problem. So again, you try to not immediately find the best solution, but you try to understand what is the criteria that we want to respect when finding the best solution because of the questions that were posed and because of the things that we consider important. So this is the space where you try to converge, having in mind the important criteria. So you try to find the best solution. However, you might not know yourself the best solution. So you are in need of the perspectives of others. So that's where you try to apply again the human-centered design principles, because one of the important things that it preaches is the collaboration and iteration. So you do this converging and diverging exercise several times until you indeed find together what is the best solution for this specific community or team in order to be able to succeed. So this, I believe, is something that doesn't happen without tension. And tension is not something that we can prevent, but it's certainly something that we can manage. And especially nowadays that we work all remotely, in order to manage it better, I think we need to prepare and plan better. So that happens also at home. Only if you have practiced managing the tension, you can have more peaceful moments. This is something that I would really love to both see happening at work and at home.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on, because collaborative leadership, what you were talking about earlier, is also what integrated care demands. You cannot build chronic care pathways that work across real health systems without listening, trust, and shared ownership. So, Eva, thank you for joining us today and for the work that you're doing to help ensure that Multipulm stays grounded in real needs, real contexts, and real adoption. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And I should give compliments to all the women who participated in this campaign. I think it takes a lot of courage to speak publicly about your experiences. And I think this is certainly a pattern and a characteristic that we see in this campaign.
I full-heartedly agree with you. A big thank you, a big round of applause is owed to our women who have taken part. And a big round of applause to you as well, as this whole campaign was your wonderful idea. This is really a great example of what you said about with collaborative leadership and helping give people the tools to take on ideas and make it their own. So a big round of applause to you as well.
Thanks, Grace, for managing this so well. I'm very happy this turned into a beautiful campaign. Thank you. Looking forward to more.
Thank you, Eva. To everyone listening, thank you for being a part of this series. If you want to support women shaping integrated care like Eva, follow the Multipulm podcast, MULTIPULM Voices. Share this episode with your network and explore Multipulm's work through our website, www.multipulm.eu, as well as our social media channels on LinkedIn and X, Spotify, and YouTube. See you in the next episode. Multipulm is funded by the European Union. Views and opinions expressed are, however, those of the author only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Health and Digital Executive Agency. Neither the European Union nor the granting authority can be held responsible for them.